So anxiety disorders are now the most common mental health condition on the planet, affecting an estimated 300 million people globally. But the thing is, that figure almost certainly undercounts the reality, because for every person with a formal diagnosis, there are many, many more living with a version of this that never gets named. Lying awake at night with a mind that won't stop, or your heart racing for no obvious reason, or replaying conversations in your head that happened days ago, or scanning for problems that haven't occurred yet, feeling exhausted but unable to switch off. If you're new here, then hello, I'm Dr. Alex. I've worked in emergency medicine for a decade, and what I want to do in this video is walk you through what's actually happening in your brain and body when anxiety takes hold, why it's becoming more common, and 7 evidence-based strategies for breaking the cycle. So let's start with reframing this entire issue, because the way that most people understand anxiety is actually getting in the way of addressing it effectively. So anxiety is almost universally framed as a malfunction, so something going wrong, a sign of weakness or fragility, or a brain that isn't working properly. But that framing is both inaccurate and also deeply unhelpful. Anxiety is not your brain malfunctioning, it is your brain doing exactly what it was designed to do, which is detecting threat, activating the body's defense systems, and keeping you alert for danger. So for most of human history, that system was the difference between survival and death. The problem is not the system itself. The problem is that in the modern environment, that system is being activated constantly by things that are not actual threats. You don't see lions or saber-toothed tigers roaming around these days, and your body never gets the signal that it's safe to switch off. Now, to understand why, it really helps to know a little bit about the basic biology. So the brain has 2 broad modes of operation governed by your nervous system. So the sympathetic nervous system is like the accelerator. It produces the fight or flight response. It releases cortisol and adrenaline. It raises your heart rate. It sharpens your attention, and it prepares the body to deal with a threat. The parasympathetic nervous system is like the brake. It's the opposite. It produces the rest and digest state. It slows your heart rate. It lowers your cortisol, and it allows the body and your brain to recover. So these 2 systems are meant to balance each other out. A real threat activates the sympathetic system, the threat then passes, and then the parasympathetic system brings everything back to baseline. The difficulty, though, in the modern environment is that the sympathetic system is being triggered repeatedly throughout the day, every day, by things that the brain interprets as threats. So a stressful email, a difficult news story, a social media argument, a blood sugar crash as well after a sugary lunch, and the recovery window between those triggers has essentially disappeared. The brain gets stuck in accelerator mode, cortisol stays elevated, and what people experience as anxiety is the physiological consequence of a system that has been activated so repeatedly it can no longer find its way back to baseline. And I want to be really clear here, none of this is to say that feeling anxious is abnormal, or that there aren't real things in life worth feeling stressed about. A difficult email, a hard conversation, a big decision, I feel all of that too, and so does everybody. That kind of anxiety can be healthy and it's appropriate most of the time. But what we're talking about in this video is something different. We're talking about the persistent background hum of anxiety that doesn't switch off even when nothing is actually wrong. The kind that follows you into your sleep, that sits in your chest for no clear reason, and that has become so constant it starts to feel like, just the way you are. So let's go into the 7 strategies then. So each one targets a specific part of this biology, and working through all of them compounds the effect considerably more than any single one in isolation. The first one is controlling what goes into the brain, particularly in the hours before sleep. So the brain cannot switch off if it's never given the opportunity to do so. Every notification, every news alert, every emotionally charged piece of content consumed late in the evening is a signal to the sympathetic nervous system to stay active. The brain doesn't immediately distinguish between a threat happening in front of you and a threat that you've just read about on a screen. The emotional response is similar, and the cortisol response that follows is real. Reducing information input in the 2 hours before bed, not as an extreme measure, but as a simple boundary, not looking at your phone a couple of hours before bed, allows your cortisol to begin its natural evening decline and gives the parasympathetic nervous system the space it needs to take over to help you sleep better. The second strategy is one that not many people seem to talk about in the context of anxiety, and that is your blood sugar stability. So when you eat something high in sugar or refined carbohydrates, your blood sugar rises very quickly, and that is just normal physiology. The body then releases insulin to bring that blood sugar back down, and in many people, it overcorrects. So your blood sugar drops below where it started. When that happens, the body treats it as a mild emergency and releases cortisol and adrenaline to pull your stored glucose back into the bloodstream. Now, those are the exact same stress hormones that drive anxiety, and the physical symptoms are almost identical as well. So you get a racing heart, you get shakiness, difficulty concentrating, and that vague, uncomfortable feeling that something isn't quite right. So somebody who has a really sugary breakfast like cereal or white bread or a processed lunch can find themselves feeling really anxious a couple of hours later with no obvious reason for it, because the actual cause was a blood sugar crash rather than anything psychological. So the fix is pretty straightforward. You need to build your meals around protein and fiber and whole foods, which release glucose more slowly and keep your blood sugar stable across the day. That alone removes one of the most underappreciated drivers of anxiety that most people have never been told about. The third one is all about caffeine. Now, caffeine timing is a lot simpler than most people expect, but it makes a massive difference. So caffeine works by blocking a chemical in the brain called adenosine. Now, adenosine builds up throughout the day and makes you feel tired. Caffeine basically blocks it, which is why you feel more alert after a coffee. The problem is that caffeine stays in the system for a pretty long time. It has what's called a half-life of around 5 to 6 hours, which means that a coffee at 3 o'clock in the afternoon is still active in your bloodstream at 9 o'clock in the evening. Caffeine also directly stimulates the same part of the nervous system that produces anxiety. It raises your cortisol and adrenaline at exactly the time of day the body is trying to wind down. So for anybody dealing with significant anxiety, cutting your coffee off before midday is one of the simplest and most effective changes available. The improvement in your sleep quality that follows feeds directly back into lower anxiety the next day, and the effect then builds over time. Okay, strategy number 4 is to move your body. So physical movement is one of the most important things for your health. When the body goes into an anxious state, it releases cortisol and adrenaline to prepare for action. So your heart rate goes up, your muscles tense, and energy is mobilized. This is the fight or flight response doing exactly what it was designed to do. The problem is that in modern life, the threat is usually an email or a conversation rather than something physical. So all of that mobilized energy has nowhere to go. But exercise resolves this directly. It uses up the cortisol and the adrenaline that the body has released, essentially completing the stress cycle and allowing the nervous system to return to a calmer state. A 2019 meta-analysis, one of these really big studies published in JAMA Psychiatry, found that physical activity reduced anxiety symptoms significantly across every single population studied, with results comparable to some medication. And beyond the immediate effect, exercising regularly over time gradually lowers the body's baseline stress response. The threshold at which the system fires drops, and it becomes easier to return to a calmer, more relaxed state afterwards. For many people, movement sort of scattered throughout the day is the single most powerful tool available for anxiety, and it is consistently underused. Now, the fifth strategy actually addresses something that most anxious people will know pretty well, which is the looping thought that just won't stop. The same worry circles around and around, never resolving, usually late at night when there's nothing else to focus on. And the reason this happens is that the brain's working memory, the mental space it uses to hold and process active information, is trying to keep track of unresolved concerns so they don't get forgotten. It simply can't let them go because they haven't been dealt with. But writing them down interrupts that loop. So when something is written on paper, your brain gets the signal that that concern has been captured and it doesn't need to actively hold on to it anymore. And there's lots of research out there, and I'll put a link in the description below, loads of research showing us that writing about your worries before a stressful event significantly reduces how much those worries interfere with performance during that event. So applied to sleep, spending 5 to 10 minutes before bed writing down whatever's on your mind, just getting it out, consistently reduces how long it takes to fall asleep and also improves your sleep quality. So it sounds almost too simple, but just give it a try because the mechanism is real and the evidence supports it. Okay, moving on to number 6, and this is all about breathing properly. So a lot of people will have been told to take deep breaths when they feel anxious, and many people find that this doesn't help, or often it makes things worse. The reason is that deep breathing alone isn't the key. The ratio between the inhale and the exhale is what matters. So the body has a nerve called the vagus nerve, the wandering nerve. And this is the longest nerve in the body, running from the base of the brain all the way down through the heart, the lungs, and the gut. And it is the main pathway through which the body shifts from its alert state into its calm state. The vagus nerve is activated by a longer exhale relative to the inhale. So breathing in for 4 counts and out for 6 or 8 counts, not forcefully, just slowly, directly triggers this calming response and begins to lower your heart rate and your cortisol within minutes. There is also a technique called the physiological sigh, a double inhale through the nose, followed by a long, slow exhale through the mouth. And the reason this works is that the double inhale fully inflates the lungs, and the long exhale that follows produces a very strong activation of the vagus nerve. It takes about 30 seconds, and not many people use this, but just give it a go when you're next feeling anxious and see if it works for you. Now, the 7th and final strategy on this list today is also the most counterintuitive, and it's the one that people respond most strongly to, and that is stop trying to make yourself feel calm. When somebody is anxious and tries really hard to relax, the anxiety almost always gets worse. And the reason is pretty straightforward. So checking whether you feel less anxious, monitoring your symptoms, trying to push your feelings away, all of these require mental effort and keep the brain in an active, alert state, which is the opposite of what allows the calm response to take over. The research on this is pretty consistent. So trying to suppress or eliminate anxious feelings amplifies them. Allowing them to be present, not engaging with them, not fighting them, simply observing them without resistance, reduces their intensity and how long they last. And this comes from a very well-established area of psychology called acceptance and commitment therapy, and the evidence behind it is really strong. It's not about giving up or resigning yourself to feeling anxious. It is about withdrawing the resistance that keeps the anxiety loop running. So anxiety that isn't fought tends to pass, but anxiety that is fought tends to escalate. And let me just finish this video with the most important point out of all of them. You do not have an anxious personality. What you have is a brain that has been pushed into a state of persistent alertness by the inputs it's been exposed to. So that's constant stimulation, or blood sugar swings, or poor sleep, or too little movement, and information that never stops. So that is not a personality trait, that is a biological response to a specific environment, and environments can be changed. The brain that has been trained into anxiety can also be trained out of it. That is what the evidence shows. So I really hope you got something useful from this video today. Let me know in the comments if there are other areas like this that you want me to focus on in the future, and I'll try my best to add them to the list.